Thank you very much, Senator. Ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm Mariano Federici. As Senator just said, I'm Senior Managing Director for a consulting firm here in Washington called K2 Integrity, focused on financial crimes risk management. But prior to that, I was the head of the Financial Intelligence Unit of Argentina, and also had the honor to chair the Egmont Group and work with Jerome Beaumont, his great executive secretary. So it's really a great pleasure to be speaking at the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Forum again, and to share this panel with such distinguished colleagues and friends. I want to thank my friend Robert Pittenger. Also, Robert, thank you very much for this kind invitation and for your tireless efforts to make this world a better place, promoting dialogue, knowledge, and legislative reform around intelligence and security. So there are many different ways to approach a discussion around the topic of illicit finance these days. As former chair of the Egmont Group of FIUs and former president of the FIU of Argentina, I of course have a perspective very much influenced by public policy and public sector considerations, but also now working for the private sector and helping financial institutions understand and manage financial crimes risks and sanctions-related risks. I can also complement this view with a private sector perspective, which I hope will enrich our discussion. I'll try to touch on what I consider to be three of the most relevant issues around global financial integrity in today's global discussion. These are Russia sanctions, corruption, and crypto. And I will end with a few words on the importance of partnerships to tackle illicit finance. I must start, of course, with a brief reference to the threat that Russia poses to global financial integrity, noting, however, that Russia's threat exceeds this legal good. As an aggressor and as a state sponsor of terrorism, Russia is a threat to the sovereignty of nations and to global peace and security. As a dictatorship and with expansionist goals, it is also a threat to democratic stability and democratic values. But for illicit finance purposes, Russia represents a threat to global financial integrity, safety, and security. As a country under sanctions, its attempts to evade sanctions pose a constant risk to global financial systems. And sanctions are having an impact on the Russian economy. Not enough, though, to stop the war, of course, especially with an aggressive actor like Putin committed to succeeding in his unprovoked invasion and in the destruction of Ukraine at all costs. Sanctions also have a tail to them. They take time to take real effect. The effects on the economy will be gradual and will increase as pressure increases. So expecting to see the end results today may be a little bit unrealistic, and asking sanctions to actually stop the war may be asking too much of them. Sanctions are effective when they are combined with other strategic actions aimed at achieving the objectives, mainly sharing intelligence, supplying weapons, supporting the Ukrainian resistance, and isolating Russia diplomatically. It would be a mistake to consider sanctions as the only tool in the strategy and to look at OFAC as the only player. This is a government-wide effort coordinated with a coalition of democracies interested in the same outcome. It is, in fact, probably the single largest coordinated effort among democracies in the use of national sanctions regimes, which is why we need to nurture that relationship and continue to work in partnership among allies. Sanctions will continue to be a key component in the tableau of pressure that is put on Putin to try to change his behavior, and will be a central point of discussion in peace negotiations. But they will also protect the integrity of our financial systems from Russian proceeds of corruption and from funds capable of empowering Russian aggression. This is one of the strengths of Western democracies. Our long-standing culture of respect for democratic values, such as the respect for the rule of law, basic human rights and freedoms, integrity, which constitute the pillars upholding economic and financial stability, have attracted the world to our markets and financial systems. Every country in the world wants to belong to the club, so we have the power to leverage this to protect those values, and it's circumstances like these ones that justify the use of it. We cannot allow corrupt autocrats that despise the rule of law, violate human rights, and put at risk global peace and security to use and benefit from our markets and financial systems as if nothing had happened. Banks are already on the look for non-transparent practices that could involve sanctions evasion, as they do not want to be liable and subject to the criminal violations and heavy penalties that contributing to evade sanctions entails. Going forward, however, there is a lot more that can be done, especially against sanctions evaders and countries that continue to do business with Russia. The US could still go more aggressively after individuals, entities, and even countries that are evading sanctions already on the books. There is still room for more enforcement in those areas like suppliers, shipping companies, and others. We have also yet to see the full application and impact of secondary sanctions, or the ability to go after those who continue to trade with Russia, even if themselves aren't yet subject to sanctions. That would allow the US, Europe, and others to go after Indian, Turkish, Chinese, and other international companies still doing business with Russia. There are many countries incapable of tagging along sanctions due to the lack of sanctions regimes. Virtually all of Latin America, for example, the region where I'm from, they have no sanctions regimes in place. The US could and should do more to promote the establishment of sanctions regimes across the world. At the international level, while the FATF has decided to impose sanctions on the country's role at FATF, on Russia's role at FATF, including by stripping it of all its leadership roles at FATF and barring them from participating in current and future FATF project teams, among other restrictions, there is still room to consider additional sanctions and even the suspension, or as Andreas proposed, the expulsion of Russia from the organization. There are other organizations, I have to say, Jerome, like the Egmont Group, which could also start taking action, as it is unacceptable for an aggressor state to continue to hold a seat at such organizations, which, as it violates with its aggression the very own core principles that such organizations are mandated to promote and uphold. I'd like to turn now to the issue of corruption, perhaps the single most important threat to global financial integrity, given its macroeconomic and destabilizing impact and the ability to catalyze more crime. Indeed, corruption is more than a proceeds-generating crime. The impact of corruption is much greater than the private gain it provides to the public official that appropriates illicit wealth. We all know that by affecting the rules of fair competition, it undermines the functioning of market economies, deterring investments, and compromising the broader business climate and macroeconomic stability. It also robs citizens of equal access to vital services, denying the right to quality health care, education, and public safety, hurting always the most vulnerable and exacerbating inequality. But perhaps one of corruption's most perverse features is that it facilitates all other crime, particularly organized crime, and affects the effectiveness of a country's system to combat crime, making prevention and detection more difficult and hindering the effective implementation of investigative and judicial processes. This is why we say that corruption is not only a major threat to the integrity of and security of our systems, but also a structural vulnerability that can incentivize and attract additional crime, compromising public order, national security, and sometimes, as we see in Russia, for instance, global peace and security. Corruption is a characteristic indeed of autocracies, given their lack of accountability, leading to serious threats to global peace and security. Democracies where corruption has escalated to systemic levels have seen a parallel erosion of the rule of law, institutional stability, the independence of the judiciary, and political stability. There are many, many examples demonstrating how systemic corruption has ultimately led to threatened democratic stability or to the destruction of democracies. This is mostly related with the fact that to protect their impunity, kleptocrats ultimately end up colliding with the rule of law, institutions such as the judiciary and the democratic system. Note that these are in turn the pillars to a safe and sound system for the protection of financial integrity. the structural elements that precondition an effective anti-corruption effort. Without political stability, rule of law, institutional stability, and an independent judiciary, there is little hope for an anti-corruption or even an anti-money laundering regime to operate effectively. Sadly, however, these structural elements and contextual factors are seldom assessed. The FATF's membership has historically chosen to appease autocracies and dictatorships, even in the face of blatant systemic corruption. That is probably why, and this is what explains why the dictatorship of Cuba has one of the highest ratings in the GAFILAT region. This is the FATF-style regional body for Latin America. Or that only 3 years ago, in 2019, the FATF approved the mutual evaluation report for Russia, giving it some of the highest ratings a FATF member has achieved. 2 immediate outcomes rated high, 4 rated substantial, 5 rated moderate, and 0 rated low. It's probably also what explains the fact that Venezuela's kleptocracy, one of the largest kleptocracies in the world, has not even been assessed by the FATF. It's not just the FATF. There are other international organizations and governments that have pursued and continue to pursue the path of appeasement to corrupt regimes. I won't mention all of them in the interest of time, but I would just say that they have truly fallen short and continue to fall short of complying with their mandate to protect global integrity, including financial integrity. The U.S. government promised to make the fight against corruption a top priority of its national agenda and its foreign policy agenda, declaring corruption a threat to national security. This is great, but unfortunately not consistent with lifting sanctions to Venezuela, one of the greatest kleptocracies in the world, or handing out funds to the government of Argentina, whose vice president is on trial, expecting a conviction this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. for having stolen over $2 billion from the Argentine state. I say this as a former accuser of the vice president of Argentina. I signed that accusation for the trial that's ending this afternoon. Thank you. The last issue I want to focus on briefly is crypto. Virtual assets have many potential benefits. They could make payments easier, faster, and cheaper, and provide alternative methods for those without access to regular financial products. But without proper regulation, they risk becoming a virtual heaven for the financial transactions of criminals and terrorists, or for irresponsible fraudsters willing to steal other people's money, as we're seeing in the news. As cryptocurrency adoption increased, so did its use by criminals, and therefore the risks to financial integrity, stability, and national security. In the absence of a strong understanding of risks in the virtual asset space and effective strategies to adequately mitigate them, a jurisdiction may become appealing to the use of crypto by criminals. Now, countries have been called by international bodies such as the FATF or the G20 to take urgent, effective action implementing international anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing standards to this sector. This will ensure transparency of virtual asset transactions and keep funds with links to crime and terrorism out of the ecosystem. Yet, most countries in the world have failed to regulate virtual assets still. Today, many virtual asset service providers are perceived as risky business and denied access to bank accounts and other regular financial services. And this is because of the lack of a legal framework and regulations. Implementing international requirements will be challenging for this sector, but it will ultimately increase trust in blockchain technology as the backbone behind a robust and viable means to transfer value. Amid calls for greater transparency and safety in the cryptocurrency landscape, there is also an urgent need for rigorous risk management and compliance. We strongly believe it is possible to create a safer and more secure crypto economy and to enhance connectivity between traditional finance and virtual asset service providers, public sector agencies, to enable the growth, safety, and scalability of the blockchain and virtual assets. We also believe the U.S. can lead these efforts, but legislative and regulatory actions are urgently needed to make this happen. Finally, let me take let me just take these last few minutes to make a call to the importance of public-private collaboration and private-to-private collaboration in the illicit finance space. As we know, emerging research, major journalistic exposés have documented the extent to which legal and regulatory deficiencies in the developed world, with the helping hand of enablers and facilitators, offer corrupt actors the means to offshore and launder illicit wealth, including in this country. This dynamic is in turn strengthens the hands of those autocratic leaders whose rule is predicted on the ability to co-opt and reward elites. This is why corruption is also a threat to national security. This said, also, the private sector collaboration has always been a key element of illicit finance strategies and counter-illicit finance strategies. If we look at the case of Russia, for instance, the market reaction to the strategy has been interesting and impressive. The markets reacted by pulling out of Russia aggressively, even without being legally required to do so, for reputational reasons in many cases, because nobody wants to be associated, and nobody should be associated, with doing business in a country whose government kills innocent civilians from another one and destroys its cities. Banks are struggling with implementing Russia's sanction programs, but their collaboration is proving fundamental to the success of such programs. In the anti-corruption field, the private sector is also contributing by implementing a number of important preventive obligations, such as customer due diligence obligations, particularly the identification and monitoring of PEP regulations, beneficial ownership identification, verification and monitoring obligations, or the criminalization of foreign corrupt practices, and many more. This is why partnerships are important, both public-private partnerships and private-to-private partnerships. Our firm, K2 Integrity, has been a big promoter of PPPs and is advising several governments in the establishment of PPPs. We've also entered our own partnerships. Just recently, we announced a partnership with TRN Labs, the leading blockchain analytics firm, to deliver combined solutions to the public and private sectors in the area of crypto. But there are more opportunities out there, and I want to invite and encourage all private sector institutions participating in this forum to reach out to each other and explore opportunities for additional partnerships. Success in the fight against financial crimes depends inevitably on effectiveness of collaboration and cooperation, whether among countries, among public and private sectors, or among private sector participants themselves. I wish you all the success in the remainder of this important event. Thanks for your attention.